Hey there. So I'm just doing an update video on my Cuban DNA results. I first got tested in 2016. My results have changed quite a bit since then. Some things have been consistent, some things have changed. Of course, the technology does get better with the more samples they get, but I still got a lot of questions. I got some answers, some interesting stuff. The last video I made, I believe sometime last year, I talked about how I found out that my great-great-grandfather was born in the U.S. in the 1880s in New Mexico. He was likely the son of Spaniards that had settled in New Mexico, and then he left New Mexico in the 1900s and went to Cuba. So, finding out that I had roots in the U.S. from, hold on, I'm running the dishwasher here. They had roots, from the U.S., well, via Spain, and went to Cuba. It was really interesting. And it kind of all comes full circle. I mean, I immigrated with my parents and my great-grandparents, which includes my great-grandpa, who's the son of this secret American, basically. We came over in 1997. We settled in the Miami area. And, I actually went to visit my great-great-grandpa's hometown in New Mexico last winter. I went down to Albuquerque, and right outside of Albuquerque is a small town called Valencia. That's where he was born, and there's not much there. It's a small, ranching town out in the desert. Real cool to see, though. And New Mexico's just got some great food and great people, so not a bad place to have in your lineage. It's a cool state. I think it's one of the most underrated states in America. But since the last video I made, I did mention my great-great-grandpa. But I have some updated results from the last video. I don't remember exactly what my results were in the previous video. They are not radically different. There's just some fine-tuning. Gotta turn it off now. I have an old dishwasher. The hose needs to be replaced. It's from 2001. Luckily, I moved into a new place which has a built-in dishwasher, but I'm still keeping this one for extra, like Thanksgiving dinner. It helps to have two dishwashers. Also, I worked as a dishwasher for many years at restaurants. I fucking hate doing the dishes. At least myself. That's why dishwasher is a lifesaver. Anyway, back on topic. So these are my updated results. And then I'm also including my mom and dad's. They didn't get tested, but Ancestry.com included which inheritance, like what I got from each parent. They now changed it that you need to get like a membership to see the results. So luckily I had written them down before this, so I do have them saved. I haven't gotten them tested. Actually, I'm planning to test my grandfather first because he is, from my mom's side, of course, my great-grandfather died in 2009, but my great-grandpa is still alive, so he'll have his side of the, he'll have inheritance from both sides, so I can find out what my great-grandparents would have had in the results. Obviously, it's not fully accurate, because you don't inherit everything perfectly down. You can inherit a little more or a little less, or maybe not inherit a certain thing. It's kind of random. DNA is kind of random. You still get 50% from a parent, from your mother, 50% from your father, but it's not always the same amount in ethnicity breakdown. So, without further ado, here's my updated results. And I think Ancestry.com might be doing another update soon. I don't know. But the highest is kind of surprising, but reasonable. It's Portugal at 39%. Now, I do have Portuguese surnames in my family tree, so that's not surprising. Plus, Portugal is right next to Spain. It's like England and Scotland. You're going to have overlap. But I also have a lot of Galician from at least my mom's side. So Galicia is right next to Portugal. So there's a lot of cultural similarities, genetic overlap. So I wonder how much of that 39 Portuguese is actually Galician. It's hard to tell. Maybe if I can do like one of those gen match things. Spain is the second highest. I'm just surprised that Spain isn't the highest, but it's not too far behind at 30%. Incidentally, I get a little more Spanish from my dad than my mom, and I'll go that when I go down the inheritance, which kind of makes sense, I guess. 30% Spain. I know, aside from Galicia, a lot of us came from the Canary Islands, and the Canary Islands is made up of people from mainland Spain, obviously, that settled there. I think a lot of them from southern Spain, but it just says Spain 30%. Then I have North Africa at 7%, and I know exactly where this comes from. This comes from my grandma, who very much looks Moorish. She's got dark skin, high cheekbones, very North African features. And her father was Galician, very white, blonde hair, blue eyes. But her mother, she was from the Canary Islands. And they were both born in Cuba, but I'm talking about like their ancestry. She's from the Canary Islands in ancestry, and she was more Moorish. So I believe she has probably Guanche DNA, who were the North Africans who lived in the Canary Islands before the Spanish got there. So if you look at people from the Canary Islands, a lot of them, you know, they look typical from Spain, but there's also a lot that look kind of more North African, and my grandma has those features. So that's pretty strong, and that's my mom's mom, by the way, so my mom definitely has those features too. And it explains why, you know, my hair is pretty wavy, but my brother's is very curly. There's actually a photo from my cousin's wedding a couple years ago, yesterday to the date actually, where his, you know, with his curly hair, he actually looks a little Jewish in the photo. But I don't have any Jewish in me, spoiler alert. But France is the next largest group at 6%. So that's 6% French, which I find interesting because there's no French surnames that I can trace from my recent family tree. But, you know, the side that this comes from my father's side, and I'll go over that too. But I don't know much about my father's side, honestly. He has a lot of uncles and aunts, it seems, but a lot of them first of all, I'm not close with at all. I didn't grow up with them. I grew up more from my mom's side. So, but I'm not sure where the French comes into play. But 6% is a pretty decent chunk, so it's recent enough. Then I have from Ireland 6%, and this is an interesting one because I think it comes from my mom's grandma, my great-grandpa, whose father was born in New Mexico. His wife, you know how in Hispanic countries there's the two surnames. So my great-grandma's maiden name is a popular Spanish surname, relatively, but then her other name from her mom's side is possibly an Irish name. It's Gill, which is G-I-L, which I know that spelling could be from Spain, but it can also be a Hispanicization of Gill with two L's, which is from Ireland. And, you know, there's also McGill, O'Gill, so all kinds of, you know, I mean, Gill is a very common part. It's like Gilligan, Gilmore, like, Gill's very common in Ireland. So it could be from there. She did have very blue eyes, which obviously the Spaniards can have blue eyes, but I mean, most of us have brown eyes, like I do. Incidentally, green eyes are actually the most common eye color in my family, but I happen to have brown. But she had very blue eyes. She was also part black, and so she had, you know, the hair was very Afro-texture. Her features were partly African. She had the wide nose, but there were those very blue eyes. So I wonder if, you know, that's where the Irish comes in. And I personally had a lot of freckles as a kid. Not so much now, but I had a lot of freckles as a kid. So I wonder, you know, maybe that's the Irish showing in. Then 3% Basque. This makes sense. Basque is a unique ethnicity in Western Europe between Spain and France. It's understandable to have a little bit of that. It's just, you know, it's part of Spain, it's also part of France, but they're not quite Spanish or French. They're their own ethnicity. It's interesting culture. And I'll get into where that comes from, but I mean, there's nothing I can trace, but Basque surnames are actually very common in Latin America. The thing is, people don't realize they're Basque because the spellings are usually Hispanicized. So, like, Echavarria is a popular Basque surname. Ibarre is another Basque surname. So these are surnames that, they sound Spanish because they're spelt Spanish, or they're pronounced Spanish, but they're not Spanish. You know, kind of like, I don't know, look at the Irish surnames, like Murphy. Well, that sounds English because you're pronouncing it in an English way, but that's the anglicization of a Gaelic name. The same thing we did with the Basque. Then we got 2% Nigeria, so we're going back to Africa, but we're going to sub-Saharan Africa, and Nigeria is like, I believe, the most populous country in West Africa, so if you have some West African, then you got some Nigerian. That's my largest chunk of West African. Then 1% Senegal, and I noticed Senegal is like the West African that seems to be more common in Latin America, because when I see DNA tests from African Americans, Senegal is usually a little further down if they have any. Nigeria is usually a lot higher. But I noticed Senegal is pretty prominent for Hispanics with black ancestry, even if it's a small amount like I do. Then there's Ivory Coast, Ghana, 1%. Oh, sorry, I skipped one. After Nigeria, there's Wales at 2%. So that's actually my second smallest European. So Wales at 2%. I'll go into where that came from. At least whose side it came from. But, okay, so after Senegal, we got Ivory Coast and Ghana, that's 1%. Then Khoisan, Aka, and Mbuti at 1%. So these are just smaller chunks of West African, and I'll go into who got who, because both my parents, spoiler alert, do have some black in them. And then Indigenous America North at 1%. This is interesting because I would assume if I had Indigenous America, it would be from Cuba. But Ancestry.com does distinguish between, like, Native American from the present-day U.S. and Canada, and Native American from Cuba and other nations in the Americas. Then the smallest chunk I have, if you can call it a chunk, is Baltic at 1%. Now, this one's interesting because I can't trace it. It's only 1%. I don't know who it. I mean, I know which side it registered, but I don't know like where this came from. But it's the one like European ethnicity, aside from the common Portuguese, Spanish, that has been the most consistent. Because when I first got tested, I got 1% Finnish, which was intriguing. Like, that is, most of this is like from Western Europe, right, that I have. Then I got this one far northeastern Europe, Finland, and no Sweden, no Denmark, no Norway, so nothing to connect it. It's just Finland, and then we got Spain and all these places. So I'm wondering, where the hell did that come from? But then it went away and turned to Baltic. So from that update, back in, I believe, 2017 onward, I've always had that 1% Baltic. That makes me believe that it's legit. It's not just a random noise. It's a genuine ethnicity that I have down my bloodline. And Finland and the Baltic countries are right next to each other. Actually, I have a friend who went to Latvia, or not Latvia, Estonia, this past summer. She got me this, so maybe I have Estonian in me. But that's interesting that that has been consistent, that 1% Estonia. Just like the Senegal has always been consistent. I mean, it's not very high, it's 1%, but it's been consistent. So it's interesting that, you know, when something is so consistent, even if the chunk is so small at 1%, that tells me it's there. I think these results make sense. I'm predominantly European, but I got a little bit of African, both from North Africa and West Africa. That's pretty common among white Cubans. Let me break down what I got from each parent according to that inheritance. So actually what I did is I got what I got down from each parent and I multiplied it by 2. So without getting my parents tested, this was the estimate. So roughly, and again, I never got them tested. This is just me, you know, multiplying their inheritance by 2. My mom, 46% from Portugal. Very interesting, very large chunk. Now again, I know that we have Portuguese because we got surnames that are very much Portuguese. The Pereira is a very common one. It's a very popular Portuguese name. In fact, it's so popular that many Americans of Portuguese ancestry have anglicized that name to Perry. You know, when a name, like how many German Americans, they turn Schmidt into Smith, or what have you. The name is that common, and it becomes part of, like, the American fabric. The spelling often changes. Of course, they came to Cuba, and they didn't feel like they would need to change the spelling because Portuguese and Spanish are so close together. But 46% from Portugal from my mom's end. Only 18% from Spain, and 18% still a lot, but, you know, even though most of our direct lineage we can trace from Spain, from that side of the family, 18% is what she would roughly have, going by the inheritance markers. And again, a lot of that Portuguese could also be from western, northwest Spain and Galicia. So, 14% North Africa. Now, if you see my mom's features, you'll see. I have a photo from back in the 90s. Here's a picture of me and my mom from roughly 1996. So, I don't know if you can see, but she has very prominent cheekbones, and that comes from the North African, because my grandma has very prominent cheekbones. I mean, they're probably higher than average, but they're not super high. But North Africa, 14%. Irish, 12%, you know, going by my 6%, times 2, roughly 12%. And again, that would probably be from my great-grandma. And I can link it to that based off, I mean, for one, the surname, and then some of her features. But also, 2 of my cousins that got tested that I have from my mom's dad's side, which is where this great-grandma, who might have Irish in her, is from. Both of those cousins also registered Irish. With one of my cousins who's she's technically like a cousin twice removed or once removed or whatever. She's my mom's direct first cousin. She got a little bit more Irish than I did, 8%. So not a whole lot, but it's interesting to think. 12% estimate if you times 2 of the 6 that I got. Then 6% Basque, so the Basque comes from her, and 2% Senegal, which is interesting because this is the only West African that I got from my mom's side. Everything else from West Africa was from my dad's. So this must be where. So my mom's mom is very dark, but it's not West African features. It's more North African. But my great-grandma, she had those mixed features. Like, you could see the largely white, but you could definitely see a good chunk of black. So if we estimate that, let's say my grandpa's 4% Senegal, maybe my great-grandma's 8% Senegal, maybe. But that 8% might be enough to show, I don't know, to show in those features. I've seen a DNA results of a dude who was 1% Senegal and 99% from Europe, and he looked a little mixed race. So, hey, dominant genes, I suppose. And then 2% Baltic, so the Baltic does come from my mom's side. And then from my dad, got more Spain than Portugal, so 42% from Spain, 32% from Portugal. And again, these 2 nations are right next to each other. I believe Ancestry.com used to just label it as Iberian Peninsula. It's cool that they separate them now, but they're still the Iberian Peninsula at the end of the day. 12% France. So, like I said, the French comes from my dad's. 4% Nigeria, 4% Welsh, and then 2% Ivory Coast, Ghana, 2% Khoisan, and 2% Native American. And that's what's interesting to me, is I thought that if I would have Native American from North America, like mainland North America, that it would have come from my mom's side, because of that great-grandpa born in New Mexico, and I know a lot of the Spaniards in New Mexico intermingled with the natives, but I don't have any native from my mom's side, I only have it from my dad's side. And I'm curious as to where that came from, and I wonder if I also have someone who came from the U.S. to Cuba from my dad's side who might have had Native American. I mean, one theory is they might have come, I got that French in me, obviously the West African, that could just be Cuba having slaves, but also, I wonder, like, maybe someone came from Louisiana. That might explain the French, might explain the Welsh, maybe, and that might explain the Native American. Because I know Louisiana's, like Cuba, very mixed culture. And there was always a lot of back and forth between Louisiana and Cuba, believe it or not. Like, before Miami and even Tampa, New Orleans was the place for immigrants in the South. But it's just interesting to think about. I know my dad's black side would come from his mom. His mom definitely has more mixed features, the curly hair. So I heard that they had like his great grandfather was at least half black. So this would make sense there. Again, the French is still a mystery. I mean, I don't doubt it's there. I mean, 6% is a good chunk, so it's got to be there, or something like that. You know, is it directly from France? Is it like from on the border between France and Spain? I'm not sure, but I don't have any Basque on his end, so. And I do know that France is kind of a funny nation about DNA testing, so, you know, French results are always kind of interesting, just because how much data do we really have? I don't know. But yeah, that's what I got. There's nothing too much shocking here when you look at him. I mean, there's nothing like, I don't have like Japanese or anything that you wouldn't expect. Some people might be a little surprised that, oh, you have Irish in you, oh, you have Welsh, where did that come from? Well, a lot of people from the British Isles did come to Cuba, actually. I know a lot of Cubans actually have Scottish in them, too. So that's not that crazy. Remember, the Caribbean, what do you think of the Caribbean aside from, you know, contemporary culture? We think of pirates as well, and a lot of these pirates came from England and Ireland and a lot of these countries. So it's not too surprising. Maybe I have some pirate in me. That's actually a cool thing to think about. That would explain some of the Irish. But there's, you know, Cuba, like the U.S., is a melting pot. Because of what's happened since Castro took over, obviously there's not people immigrating there like there used to be. But before all that, people did go there from all kinds of countries. So it's not surprising if you get tested and you find more than what you expected. You know, you expect, oh, I'm going to have either mostly Spanish or maybe Spanish and African. You might, but there could be a lot of other nationalities and ethnicities in there too. And, you know, some of this could be, oh, these people came to Cuba and then that they mixed in, or maybe these people came to Spain and they mixed in Spain and then they came to Cuba. So there was mixing going on in Europe. But anyway, that's just my results, updated. It's kind of interesting. Here's that too. I don't want to see it, but that's the breakdown. Anyway, I'll try to get my grandfather tested eventually. And it's not, I mean, the DNA test's like $99, so it's not super expensive, but it's also not pocket change that I can just give away at this moment. So, but I do plan to get him tested, and my grandma, and eventually my parents, because I know they're not going to spend money on it. I mean, they find it interesting, but not enough to. I'm the one who's more into the genealogy aspect of everything, but, yep, that's it for now. Bye-bye.